On a quiet night in May 1980, a young single mother stepped out into a hospital parking lot to bring her car around. She had kissed her little boy goodnight just hours before. Her co-workers saw the car pull up. They saw it leave, but they would never see her again. What happened next would haunt one family for decades, not just because of what they lost, but because of what kept finding them. This is the story of Dorothy Scott. Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders, where we explore the unsolved cases that still haunt America. Anaheim, California in 1980 still carried the image people wanted to believe in. Set in the heart of Orange County, it was a place associated with quiet neighborhoods, steady routines, and a sense of order. Just a few miles away, Disneyland reinforced that image. Clean streets, controlled crowds, a place built around the promise that nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. But beyond that public image, Anaheim had changed. The orange groves were disappearing, replaced by office buildings and industrial parks. Places that were busy during the day could feel very different after dark. But for many residents, Anaheim still didn't feel like a place where serious violence happened. That belief shaped how people moved through their lives. It shaped what they noticed and what they didn't. At the same time, the world was operating with limits that are easy to forget now. There were no cell phones, no caller ID. If someone called repeatedly, there was often no clear way to identify them, no quick way to trace where the call came from. A voice on the other end of the line could remain just that, a voice. It was against this backdrop, one that felt safe but wasn't as insulated as it appeared, that this story takes place. 32-year-old Dorothy Jane Scott was a single mother living in Stanton, California, with her aunt and her 4-year-old son, Sean. Those who knew her described Dorothy as quiet and exceptionally kind-hearted person. She worked as a secretary and bookkeeper for 2 Anaheim businesses, Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop. Both catered to the laid-back counterculture of the time and were located only a few blocks from her parents' home. Every morning, Dorothy would take Sean to her parents before heading to work. Jacob and Vera Scott would look after him until Dorothy arrived after work to pick him up. With support from her family, Dorothy was building a life for herself and her son. But for several months before her disappearance, a shadow had fallen over her routine. A quiet life was interrupted by a series of anonymous, escalating phone calls. The caller had intimate knowledge of her daily routine. Dorothy became so concerned she began taking self-defense classes and considered purchasing a handgun for protection. She told her family that she vaguely recognized the voice but couldn't place it. After work on May 28, 1980, Dorothy dropped by her parents' home as usual. She stayed a while before heading out with Sean. She was planning to stop by the psych shop for a quick employee meeting at 9 p.m. and then they would head on home to Stanton. Shortly before she left her parents' home that night, she received a call that visibly upset her, a call like so many others she had received lately. But Dorothy carried on. When she arrived at the psych shop for her meeting, she noticed that a co-worker, Conrad Bostron, looked ill and his arm was inflamed by a spider bite. Although it was late, she insisted on taking him to the emergency room. Another co-worker, Pam Head, went along to help. Not wanting to take her son to the ER with them, Dorothy stopped by her parents' house to drop him off. It was then that she changed from a black scarf to a red one, a detail that would become important later in the investigation. While Conrad was being treated, Dorothy and Pam watched television and read magazines in the waiting room. When Conrad was released at 11 p.m., Dorothy offered to bring the car around, while Pam and Conrad went to pick up a prescription at the hospital pharmacy. It was a simple decision, the kind you don't think twice about. She'd grab the car, pull it around, and they'd all head home. Dorothy stepped out into the parking lot. For a brief moment, she was alone. When she hadn't returned after several minutes, Pam and Conrad walked out to the parking lot. They reported seeing a car speeding toward them, high beams blazing, blinding them from seeing the driver. They waved to get the driver's attention, but the car sped past them, ran a stop sign, and disappeared into the night. They assumed it was Dorothy. They assumed there was an emergency, perhaps with her son. For 2 hours they waited for her to return for them, but she never did. Police were called, but found no cause for alarm. About 2 hours later, her car, a 1973 white Toyota station wagon, was found 10 miles away, burning, in an alley in Santa Ana. Dorothy was nowhere to be found. There were no witnesses to an abduction, no clear suspect, and no sign of a struggle. For reasons never fully explained, the police asked the family not to make Dorothy's disappearance public. About a week after the disappearance, Dorothy's mother received a call from a man who simply said, "I've got her," before hanging up. 2 weeks into the investigation, Dorothy's father, likely in an attempt to generate movement in the case, asked the local paper to run a story on the disappearance. The day the case was made public in the newspaper, a man called the Santa Ana Register and spoke to editor Pat Riley. The caller claimed he had killed Dorothy because she was his love and he had caught her cheating. But there was a problem. Dorothy wasn't known to be in a relationship. The caller provided details that had not been released to the public, specifically that Dorothy was wearing a red scarf. It was a chilling revelation. Dorothy had only changed into that scarf in the privacy of her parents' home just minutes before leaving for the hospital. That suggested something deeply unsettling. Whoever made that call may have known far more about Dorothy's movements that night than anyone outside her circle should have known. He also claimed Dorothy called him that night to tell him she was at the medical center. Pam refuted this, saying that she and Dorothy were together the entire time except when Dorothy went to the ladies' room just before leaving. She was adamant that Dorothy did not make a phone call from the hospital. For the next 4 years, the phone at the Scott residence rang almost every Wednesday afternoon. The caller would either ask for Dorothy or taunt her mother by saying he had killed her. The caller's story didn't always match the facts. Still, he knew things. The calls stopped in April 1984 when Dorothy's father happened to answer the phone instead of her mother. In August 1984, the mystery reached its tragic conclusion. A contractor for Pacific Bell was preparing to dig a trench for laying cables under Santa Ana Canyon Road. While backing up his tractor over some small trees and brush, he spotted human remains. Dorothy Scott had been found. 4 years of questions, answered in the worst possible way. Near the site, investigators found Dorothy's turquoise ring and watch, which had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29, 1980, just 90 minutes after she was last seen. Over the years, several names were discussed, but it's important to be clear. No one was ever charged in Dorothy's murder. One person reportedly brought forward by the family was Mike Butler, a man they believed may have been obsessed with Dorothy. According to accounts of the case, his sister worked with Dorothy, which raised questions about whether he may have had some indirect connection to her daily life. Another person sometimes discussed was John Casilla, the owner of the businesses where Dorothy worked. The land where her remains were discovered has been linked to him, although this connection was never fully established in the investigation. But again, these are theories and points of interest, not proof. Ultimately, no one was charged. This is the kind of case that changes how a community thinks. As the days passed, the ordinary routines began to feel less ordinary. The drive home, the parking lot, the late shift, the quiet streets people had traveled 100 times without a second thought. Dorothy's disappearance reminded people that danger did not always announce itself. Sometimes it knew your routine. Sometimes it waited in a familiar place. Dorothy's memorial was held at the Church of Our Father. She was laid to rest in Forest Lawn Memorial, Cypress. But for her family, there was no rest. The phone just kept ringing. What perplexes me most about this case is the extent of harassment the family received after Dorothy's disappearance. Why did he continue to call? Was it control or guilt or attention? And despite the caller's frequent contact, he was never identified. Most accounts refer to the caller as a man, but the description of the voice was limited. Dorothy's mother said it was soft-spoken. That leaves us with a frustrating reality. Even the one thing the family heard again and again was never enough to identify him. Dorothy's father once owned the psych shop and knew all the employees. The night he answered the phone, the caller never spoke but just hung up. Could it be that they were afraid that he would recognize the voice? The other detail I keep coming back to is the red scarf. Dorothy changed into that scarf just before leaving her parents' home, before taking Conrad to the hospital. Yet the caller knew all about it. That raises a difficult question. Did he see Dorothy that night, or did he learn that detail from someone close enough to the investigation or her routine to know about it? Much has also been said about the 2-hour wait before police were called. But as strange as that might sound now, in 1980 it would not have seemed as alarming in the moment. There was no quick way to check where Dorothy had gone, and so they waited. It may have been a tragic misread of the situation, but not necessarily a suspicious one. And by the time they stopped waiting, Whatever had already happened. Years later, Pam would say she wasn't even certain it was Dorothy's car at all. Dorothy Jane Scott's final known actions were rooted in kindness. She checked on a sick coworker. She made sure her little boy was safe. She stepped into a parking lot to bring her car around so others would not have to wait. And then, in the space of a few minutes, everything changed. What makes Dorothy's case so haunting is not only that she vanished, it's whoever took her seemed unwilling to let the family grieve in peace. For years, the phone kept ringing. A voice kept returning. And every call reopened a wound that never had a chance to heal. Dorothy's parents passed away without knowing who took their daughter's life. Her son Sean was only 4 years old when she disappeared. Today, the hope remains that the one piece of information, that one memory, or one long-held secret might finally identify the person behind the voice. If you have any thoughts on Dorothy's case, I'd love to hear them. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.